Okay, let's start na. Good evening, guys. I would like to thank everyone for coming in this traffic and middle of the week. Middle of the week. It's not always that people go out of their way to learn. I mean, personally, around this time, nagdodota ako. I'm hoping that we're able to give you a fruitful time of your investment dito. So for tonight, as you can see on our title, it's a fusion of not just the technologies but communities, because this event is supported by three community groups. It's with Data Engineering Pilipinas, Java User Group, and Kafka Manila. And we also have a number of sponsors, so we'll talk about that later. So I'm sure you are appreciating the sponsorship that we have now. We have a very nice, large, spacious venue. We have nice food and drinks. And then we have a nice set of topics that we'll be going through tonight. Okay. So without further ado, let's start. Siguro quick lang, we have a very nice set of, I would say, distribution for the attendees, just to give yourself an idea of who else is within this room with you. I think we're around 70 to 80 na, I think. The limit of this place is around 100 pounds. More or less, we have a balance of genders. In terms of roles, I think everyone here is more or less working already. And some are in management, almost half are in either our students or grad students or from academia. And then there is our professionals on the right, tech roles. And then in terms of organizations, there are some that are, or a lot are coming from corporate, a lot are coming from schools as well. There are some that are from government, there are some freelancers. If you recall in the meetup, there is a survey that you answered. What are you getting? Why are you joining this? A lot are here to learn. And that's good to know. And a lot, there are a lot of peripheral things, like networking, knowledge sharing. Of course, data is here, which is going to be the anchor of our topics, the rest of our topics tonight. Okay, let's go through the program. We're done already with the food. We'll start with a few quick introductions. And then we start with the lightning talks. So the set of lightning talks are coming from myself and Tristan. And then after that, Doc Brian will be talking about a project being done by DLSU. And then the last one is we have Naveen here. He's from Confluent. We'll be talking about Kafka. And then we'll close the night with some Q&A or more network. Okay? Questions from the crowd? Oh, good. Okay. So before we start some of our introductions, let's start muna here. Let's thank our sponsors. I want to start with Confluent. You want to maybe talk about or later? Okay. So one of our sponsors is Confluent. Half of the pizzas and the drinks are coming from them. So thank you, Confluent. At DSI, the LaSalle. So this campus is actually very new. So if you've not been here or you haven't heard, it's a micro campus from LaSalle, and the main focus is really on the data. So they have a master's in data science program here, and it's rich and growing. So they're very generously provided the venue for us. And then lastly, we have Azul Systems that is also sponsoring the food and drinks. Okay, for the meetup organizers, I'll start. Data Engineering Pilipinas. So, if you don't know, it's a community around data. The focus is engineering, no? But it's actually, most of the discussions are, I think, cuts across all of the data roles already. But the main focus really there is learning. So we do a lot of sharing, we do a lot of discussions around projects and problems around data, particularly navigating data careers. Visit the website, there's lots of stuff there. We are mostly active in Facebook, but I think there are some people that are, don't like Facebook. So we're also active in Discord and I think LinkedIn, things like that. Okay, and the other one that is supporting this event is Java User Group. You want to later na. Sige. So Java User Group is the users of Java. So if you haven't tried Java, Java is my first love. During college, I learned it. So it's one of the 4 original champions of open source. Besides and they're the ones that are the same. They're doing a lot of sharing, meetups, etc. And then the last one is Manila Kafka. It's led by Enna, although she's not here. They're doing meetups around Kafka. So Kafka is a topic that will be discussed later by Naveen. If you want to learn more about it, you can join their meetup group, which is there. Okay, let's go to the lightning talks. So a bit about myself, a quick introduction. So very quick because it's just supposed to be lightning. So I'm Mike. I'm currently the head of data analytics for San Miguel. And I've been through a number of companies, banking, telco, IT, retail, energy, etc. Most of my focus is around data transformation. So when you say data transformation, you take a look at how a business operates and try to improve the way they're doing things with respect to data. More recently, I've been doing a lot of studying myself. So currently, I'm a student at UP Diliman. I'm undergoing their PhD program in AI. But I started, most of what's taking my time recently is really the community. So last year, we started Data Engineering Pilipinas. The goal, I kind of talked about this a while ago. No? So our main focus is data literacy. Outside of that, I do mentoring and teaching with FTWC, if you haven't heard of that. So it's a data science bootcamp for women. So that's quick stuff about me. Okay, let me jump to my presentation. So I'll try to make this. Okay, so my topic is of course about data engineering. So data engineering, it's one of the most unsung roles or workflow in data, in the field of data. The other one is data governance. If you've never heard of it, that's my point. So data engineering, my main topic for the next maybe 7 to 10 minutes will be about this. So we'll be talking about what is data engineering, what's the DE workflow, you will usually hear people talk about the modern data stack, and then I'll show you a very simple project, and then we'll just try to extrapolate out of that some questions around what does it mean to be real world now. Okay, so what is data engineering? So this is definitions from Wikipedia. Data engineering refers to the building of systems to enable collection and usage of data, and that's it. So you collect data and you make sure people can use it. Okay? You may think it's easy, and a lot of people assume it is, but it's not. Well, there's a lot of nuances around it. Making data usable usually involves substantial compute and storage as well as data processing. So usually there's a lot of that. So on the right side, you can see a very simple chart. They tried to liken it to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you can see the data engineering workflow is at the bottom now. It doesn't mean that it's not important, but if you think about it, it's really hard to do the more higher level, I would say, stuff if you don't have proper data engineering. The way I describe it to other people is that definitely you can do reporting, you can do analytics, you can do machine learning, you can do AI, but it's going to be very painful, it's going to be very slow, it's not going to be scalable. And that's what data engineering enables. So quickly, what's the workflow? The workflow is just moving data around. So you have your source, and then you move that source to your storage, and then from your storage to your users. That's really the main workflow. It sounds simple, but a lot of things are happening underneath and around it. Okay? Usually we summarize the steps into this. No? So usually you will hear it called ETL. Recently they call it ingestion, transformation, and then serving. There's a lot of ways to describe it, but it's mostly the same tasks. Okay? Now let's go straight to the project. So I created the project. You can actually download this and fork it and try it on your own. No? We'll share this, don't worry. No? So this project, I'll talk about this, but the core thing of what I want to highlight for this is that it's three things. The first one, it's very beginner friendly. So if you want to try it out on your own and you don't think you have zero background, you can actually do it. Maybe at the very least, you would need Python, a bit of Python and a bit of SQL. Next is that it's single node and low resource. No? So most of the time, every time they hear data engineering, you will hear cloud, you will hear distributed computing. No? This one you can do on your laptop. And then number three is 100% open source. So if you have no money to spend on licenses or whatever, you can do this. No? It's completely free. Okay. Okay, so very quickly, I'll talk about the project. No? So my wife, she recently started a clinic. So a vet clinic. So if you have pets, and I'm trying to help her out in terms of how to grow her business. So we have a business problem. She wants to grow, but she feels that there's a lot of competitors around her area. So the question is, what is my competitive landscape? So you have a business frame. And then you convert that business problem into the problem that you want to think about with respect to data. So I actually identified two problems. The first one is, where are all my competitors? So this is the location of her clinic. This is Google Maps. So the question is, where are all the vet clinics around there? And then we can also ask the question, how can I do better than them? That's the other one. So this is an example of a competitor clinic. And it's, we try to identify what metrics can we use to say that they are doing better besides existing already or being larger, etc. So since we're using digital data, we will use digital metrics. So one would be likes, dislikes. Here, you get there. Sometimes they also have reviews and comments in Google Maps, right? So that's what we will do. So a quick review of the project, we divided into two things. The first one is the data, and then the other one is the flow of the code. So on the left side, we have the project. So we break down into like the flow that I showed a while ago, which is exactly here. The code is just extract, load, and transform. So extract is you pull the data from the source, that's your ingestion. You transform it to make it usable for whatever purposes, and then you load it to a storage. Okay? So this is the example data. I have two examples here. The first one is from Google Maps. Okay? So if you try to search vet clinics, it will actually show you this data. So the name of the clinic, the longitude, latitude, and then some other stuff. And then this one I manually gathered. So you can, just as an example of how to use manual data. But I think this can also be automated. But essentially this is the clinic, and then if they have a Facebook page, and then metrics. So what's our structure or architecture? So this is the very simple setup that we will use. We have the source, and then we have the ingestion process, and then we will use what is called the DuckDB. So DuckDB is an open source, very small OLAP, analytics platform. So it's like, I think 8 MB or something. So it's very small. And then we will use that as our main analytics platform. And then after that, we will use Metabase for reporting. But we will also showcase other stuff, just to show some flavor. So I will go straight to the demo. Okay, so this is the code. Okay, quickly I will just run you through on what it looks like. So we have the extraction here. Okay, so this is the code that will try to get the data, and it will save it as a pandas file, and then we will transform it here. The next one. Essentially what this does is that it tries to clean the data because it's dirty. When I first tried this, I think I got vet clinics from the US, things like that. So I had to clean it up to make sure that it's just nearby the clinic. Actually, you can see here, I even filtered the distance. So I computed the distance between the different clinics and then filtered them. And then the last one is the code that will load into DuckDB, right? You can see here that it's not even you can still refactor this because I created the table here. Ideally, you have a separate script for the data model, so this will only be insert now. Anyway, so that's it. I have a main file that will call all of this. I think I have one last here. I think it's in transport. I just want to show you. So if you recall, I have another file that has the Facebook statistics. So I merged it here. So there's a like a join but using pandas. And then we will have the final data frame loaded in our DuckDB. Okay, do you have questions so far? It's very simple. If you want to do this, you can just check the GitHub later. So I will show you 3 ways to look at the data, the final data. The first one is using DuckDB. So here, so you just need to download DuckDB. You can download it and pass the resulting data file. And then once you are there, sorry it's small no, because it's just a screen. But there are wait. So before I show that, I can just show you that you can type help, so you can see all of the commands you can use. But if you type tables, you will see the table that's already ingested. So we have vet clinics, and then we can do like very simple select star from vet clinics, and then chuck. Okay, so you can see here the name of the clinic, the address, the longitude, latitude. There are some others it's not showing, but you can see that it's already joined together. So with just here, you can see already that the whole pipeline is complete, and technically you can already start doing your analysis. But let's try to show, improve the flow. I mean, wait, let me just wait here. Okay. The other tool that you can use is dvBeaver. I'm not sure if you've heard of that tool. I closed it. Let me just open it. So dvBeaver is a client, a database client. So it's a database client. So you have essentially a GUI. So you can connect here, right? And then let's run this command. Execute. Right. And then you can go ahead and query the database. So here, what I'm doing is just I'm getting the top highest performers from the clinic, from the main clinic. And then you can see the different metrics. The last one that I will show you is Metabase. So I will disconnect this. Metabase is it's a free, but they have like a paid version. The best way you can think of it is it's like Power BI. But since it's free, it's not that exciting. But it's it's open source and it's it's good enough. So you can open up Metabase and then you can connect that to your DocDB. So you're already like a small analytics team if you can do this. So you can gather data, you can create a pipeline, and then you can do some analysis out of it. Okay. So while it's loading, let's go back to my talk. Okay. So in how many minutes we were able to do? Granted, I've already written the code. We were already able to demonstrate a very simple data engineering pipeline. But in the real world, it's not that simple. Sometimes you will be required to use real-time data. Sometimes you will be required to use not just like kilobytes of data, but terabytes of data, petabytes of data. Sometimes you will need to work with data that is so dirty. And that's essentially the 5 Bs. They call it the 5 Bs of big data. You have volume, you have velocity, you have variety. Right now, I'm only looking at 2 sources of data. One is Google Maps, the other one is manually gathered. What if it's 500 sources? What if it's 1,000 sources? Then veracity is the quality. What if it's 30 in all many different ways? And then the last one is the value. So right now, I'm like using alternative data to try to analyze the business of my wife. But we don't really know what's actually valuable until we try it and test it. And that's actually the real world. There are so many things that you can adjust and so many other applications that you can explore. And that's actually one of the things that makes it complicated. And the challenge here is that, especially when you're most of the focus at the moment is really at the last part, analytics, reporting, AI, but they don't appreciate the whole work that comes into setting something this up and making it work. Okay. Also, I'd like to highlight that under all of this is supported by these concepts. Number one is software engineering. Because there's a lot of engineering that goes into this setup, this architecture. You need to make sure that it's fit for purpose, fit for the cost, etc. And then there's a lot of governance that you need to think about to make sure that it's properly working in a ethical way, in a proper way, high quality way, etc. Okay, I think my Metabase is working already. Or not? Oh no, it's not. I'll just pause for questions. So questions, you have questions? You have a smaller device like maybe a Raspberry Pi or a small VPS, and that's how you maximize it. Is it working already? No. Anyway, that's okay. You can try it out on your own. So Metabase is free. You can just connect it and then I think you will need a DocDB driver, but it's also free. The fun thing is that it also, the way it functions, it's like Looker. So it will already recommend to you different stuff. So once you load it and connect it, you will already see some visualizations. Yeah. Okay, and that ends my talk. Thank you guys. So for the next, I will quickly introduce Tristan. So Tristan is a leader and open source contributor in IBM Java capability. He's previously with IBM. He's been really focused in Java. He's an expert and leader in that space. He's also an open source contributor. He has extensive experience in software development, product development, API development, and microservices. He's an expert in back-end design, architecture, and as well as modern Java and cloud technologies. He's proficient in leading cloud transformations through refactoring and rehosting, as well as actively writes technical articles for his blog, fuj.i. Guys, welcome, Tristan.
Good evening, guys, and I'm Tristan Mahinay. Thank you, Mike, for the introduction. So, I will be the one representing the Java User Group Philippines as part of the organizer, and I will be the speaker for some technical about batch processing. Next slide. So, I want to introduce what is Java User Group Philippines. So, Java has been in this world for about 28 years already. So we decided, both the Java global community and the Java user group in the Philippines, to revive the meetups and the online meetups and bootcamps for the Java. And we revitalized this since April of 2023. And we are the only active Java user group here in the Philippines as of this 2024. And we have collaboration from Oracle, from the Java community process, and the OpenJDK community like the Fuji. So these are the 3 Java user group leaders in the Philippines: me, Johnson, and Kirby. Kirby is a businessman, Johnson is a tech professional, and me also. And our volunteers for this one is Trisha, Eric, and Gladwin. So Gladwin is here. Hi, Gladwin. And we have Eric, which is a speaker also for our bootcamps, and Trisha as our public relations. So, since April of 2023, we already conducted 10 meetups already, including the bootcamp. No, 10 meetups already until now. This is the 10th one. And most of our meetups are done in Orange and Bronze in Legazpi Village, Makati. And we also celebrated the 25th anniversary of the Java community process. So JCP is different from Java. So we conducted our first modern Java bootcamp in AWS Philippines in BGC also. And we partnered with DevCon Manila under the DevCon Philippines. So is anyone here was part of this bootcamp? So, as part of the Java user group, we have the education initiative. So, we are now conducting bootcamps or creating curriculums for the Java for the Filipino students and early professionals. So, soon we will be having our bootcamp for the Spring Framework. And then, later on, we will have a raffle prize for JetBrains. This is a license for JetBrains IDEs. For Java, we use IntelliJ, but if you are doing some other programming languages, you can also use the license that we will be raffling. So we will be giving a 2 license later on, an ultimate license. So via raffle. And our food sponsor is Azul, one of the primary distributors of OpenJDK, or so-called Java Development Kit. So, if you are interested on how to migrate your OpenJDK applications, just scan the QR code. And latest news from Java, from the dev.java website. And if you are interested to be a speaker and volunteer for the Java community, you can also scan this QR code. Wait. Okay. And join our community. We are active in Facebook, but we also we are active in Facebook and Meetup. We announce our meetups in the meetup.com, and we also have our LinkedIn and some Discord and Twitter. So you can just scan it in just one QR code. Okay. So let me start the technical talk that I will be having today. So earlier, Mike discussed about analytics, the architecture of the ETL. So one of the components of ETL is called batch process. So when you want to load all your big data into a different source from another source, you want to schedule it and use a technology called batch. So in Java, we are utilizing a technology called Spring Batch. So what is Spring Batch? So most of the organizations that uses Spring Batch are enterprises already. They are big enough, or they have the data, the capacity of the data that they have is very large, so that they can transfer it to a more different database, from example, from relational to columnar or vice versa. So one technology that can help you to transfer it is Spring Batch. So Spring Batch is not a scheduler framework. It's a framework to develop the code for the batch application. So you can use another technology to schedule your batches. And typical batch processing is you read it, you transform it, and you write it to another source. So that's why it's called ETL. So what are the components of the Spring Batch architecture? So first, it's called the application, the batch core, and the batch infrastructure. The application contains the business logic that you have. This is your if-else or the services that you are creating, so that you can transform your data to another model. So the request response models are from the APIs. The data transfer objects are used for the databases. And in Java, we love abstraction. So that's why the first thing in batch core is job, which is the abstracted part of the batch process. So when we say job, it contains many steps. So steps is now a sequential process in a job. So for example, if you want a job that processes data of a person, you want a predefined step on how to do that. So that's why it's called a step. And then the job repository means that you want to provide a mechanism on how to store the metadata during your batch run. So you want, for example, if your batch suddenly fails, then your job repository is there to help you to restart it. And from the infrastructure part that helps on how the job and the step works is item reader, processors, and writers. So this is also abstraction. So for the read part, we call it item reader. For the transformer part, we call it item processor. From the writer part or the load part, we call it item writer. And if you want to, for example, a single step, part of a single step that wants just to delete a column, or let's say truncate a table or delete a files in the directory, you may want to use a tasklet. So we call it a tasklet. So typical batch process, yeah, so there will be the extract from there. It can be a data meaning from a database, files, or a message. So it can be from a Kafka or a AMQP. And transform it and load it to another source again. You can write to a Kafka, you can write it to a file, and you can write it to a database. So typical batch process using Java is one concept also is threads. We love using threads. So we want to optimize the use of threads inside the OS, or OS contains the process, and process contains many threads. So we want to utilize that in batch processing. So there are two parts. Typical, these are the common or the famous ones, but there are still different ways. But the first one is multi-threaded. We want to make many threads during the batch process so that each thread can handle many data. So one is already processing while one is another processing set of data. Now, partitioning is a good concept in the cloud environment because if you are doing now like containers. Each container now can handle different data, and each container now can handle different threads. So your data now is split into a more fine-grained control, so that each of the data can be, if you familiar with the divide and conquer concept in computer science, that's how the partitioning works in batch. Okay, so I will give a scenario. One of the scenarios of batch process is extract service. I'll extract data from a file and write it to a persistent storage. For now, we don't need to transform anything. And our input is 500,000 fake person data from my file. We call it flat file. And the delimiter of that is comma, so we call it CSV. And the output will be a 500K database records. So the architecture of the fake person batch, so here will be a file directory. So container means is one application. So this is your software, and then one application will be file directory. The center part will be the batch application consisting of the job, step, and the reader and writer. And the latter part, which is the output, which our MySQL using the demo database name. And we will use a container for that using Podman Desktop. Okay, let's start the demo. So first, basically the use of Podman Desktop or Docker Desktop, if you are familiar with Docker Desktop. So Red Hat also created a Docker Desktop on their own, so we call it Podman Desktop. So if you don't want anymore to install MySQL on your local machine, you want to use container so that it's already configured here and you can up this anytime you want. Okay. So I'm gonna up my MySQL. So if you see, there will be MySQL database already created that is exposing us to our local machine to port 3308. So let's see if we can access the MySQL. Okay, so here you go. It's like you are already inside your database, right? So you can already configure, you already can execute SQL commands here. So I think this one, we didn't have the, let's see, I created the demo database. So I changed the database to the demo database that we will be using. So for now, there will be no tables, but later on, there will be tables upon executing our batch application. So here now is our batch application. This is the main entry point of our batch application. And this command line runner is just to execute our batch job called the person data job. And here is the configuration of that job. So a typical batch job contains the reader. So we will read it to a flat file. And we will get the first, last name, city, building number, and street name. And then we will output it to a writer now. So we will now insert it to a MySQL database. And then since we love using threads, we are now invocated a thread to help us fast track the process of our batch. And here is a step. So step contains now all of the item reader and item writer. And the listener partner is just to log on where is our job application. And the job that is configured to abstract all the step and the item reader and writer. Yeah, and this is the data that we will be using. So for now, I will be using the 500K data, so it's many. And we have this, we call it the YAML file. So we declare some configurations for our batch job. So for example, we want to connect to the MySQL that I've already started. And I've also used some optimization like the connection pooling. So it's part of the database process to cache your connections during database calls. And here is the schemas that will be executed later so that we can put our data inside the MySQL. And here's the data. So I've instructed my batch application that for each 20,000, it will insert into the database. So let me start this application now. I think this will be around less than 4, I hope, 4 minutes. Okay, so let's wait because I've instructed it to load and extract in 20,000 records, 20,000 records per insert. So for now, I'm open up to questions if you have questions. Yes, sir.
How do you usually handle failures in batch?
What's the question?
How do you handle failures?
Oh, failures. Yeah, so failures can be into two. Failures done by the programmer or failures done by the system that is unexpected. So where's between the two, what do you think? Yeah, the expected. So the expected can be done using retry mechanism. So in the batch process, we can retry things if it will be expectedly by the application. But for example, stack overflow or out of memory, we cannot handle that. So that's not part of the Spring retry mechanism.
So what will happen on the day?
It will not be, since Spring Batch uses transactions, and as much as possible, if you are using relational database, it will revert back. So nothing will happen. Yeah, it will be empty, the destination. So where are we now? 320,000. 180 left. Yeah, 180 left. Last now. So I would like to add, we are using now a thread called virtual. We are not anymore using the thread under the process of MyOS. It's the Java already that creating its own threads. So there's no, it is not dependent to my operating system or anymore.
Double abstraction. May pot ka na, may JVM ka.
Oh. Okay, it's done now. So job time taken just 2 minutes and 29 seconds. You have already 500,000 data in the MySQL. So let's check to the MySQL. Okay. So a while ago it was empty, right? So my batch application created these tables in its own. And when you see the batch with the prefix batch, it's the metadata of the Spring Batch, because Spring Batch wants to store it on what's happening under the hood. And my person here is the one that from the file itself. So let's select account from person. So if you see count 500,000 in just 2 minutes, right? So with the help of the threads, we transferred it in just 2 minutes. So yeah, that's end my talk. And if you want to connect with me, I put a QR code.
Okay guys, don't forget to add Tristan in LinkedIn. You get to have more Java tips. Okay, so for the next talk, it's not true. Yan, okay. Yes, he. Okay. For the next talk, we have Professor Brian Paul Samson, PhD. He is currently an assistant professor of computer science at De La Salle University. He's the co-director of the Center for Complexity and Emerging Technologies, integration of human-computer interaction, development of civic media technologies promoting pro-social behavior, design of human-centered interactive technologies aimed at enhancing personal productivity. He studies social technical system dynamics, particularly crowds and social networks, and impact of technological solution. He has a PhD in Systems Information Science from Future University, Hakodate, Japan, an MS and BS in Computer Science from De La Salle University. He is a Japanese government scholar under Professor Yasuyuki Tsumi, and has the following citations and awards. So he's a very highly recommended professor. He's also currently so he's currently also leading the program for MSDS in De La Salle. So maybe he can also talk about that a bit later. So guys, everyone, let's quick round of applause for Doc.
So yeah, good evening everyone. Sorry for it's final season, so I'm encoding grades. Good evening. It's my first time attending the Data Engineering Pilipinas meetup. And the main reason why I'm standing before you is because we are hosting you tonight. But anyway, I also wanted to share something maybe related to what you're doing as data engineers. And this is a project that we did with the Department of Software Technology, as Department of Science and Technology, or DOST. So we were funded last 2021. We were given a funding to do this project. So the project is called PhilWordNet. So for you, so who among you are familiar with a WordNet? Okay, so for those of you doing natural language processing projects, a WordNet is a very valuable resource that you might use in some of your projects. And unfortunately for the Philippines, we don't have a WordNet yet. Okay. So the main objective of this project is to build a WordNet. And this is one of the ambitious projects that we're starting because in the institute, in the Data Science Institute, we have one research program or one center that we call the Philippine Internet Observatory. So it's very similar to the Oxford Internet Institute. So the main inspiration for this project is the emergence of new words online. So every day you see a new word that's popping up. Either it's coming from the gamer community or some K-pop fandom. So they create words, they proliferate online, and other people pick it up and then use it in their daily conversations. So what we wanted to do in this project is it possible for us to monitor when these new words pop up, what their meanings are, and then store them somewhere, okay, as a resource for other people. No? So parang you can think of it as if you're familiar with Urban Dictionary. No? If you've used Urban Dictionary, that's where all the new words are logged, right? But our official lexicographers in the Philippines don't really have a say on what's logged in the Urban Dictionary. It's very crowdsourced. Tama? So they don't have a say. And hopefully with this project, they will have a say on the actual meanings of these new words. No? So these are just examples of when these new words started popping up. Danes is a very old word already. Like during our time pa ni Mike. Nagamit na yun. Danes. No? So there are many new words. No? Yeah. And then these are just examples. And then the very popular one, awit. Awit is really in informal Tagalog or Filipino. Awit is to song or to sing. But now it's an expression of disappointment. Okay? Awit. So that's the more dominating sense, okay, of the word nowadays. Okay? So is it possible for us to detect all of that? And this is what a WordNet looks like. It's just a bunch of words connected by their relationships and the type of relationship, no? So similar to, their antonyms, etc. So there are many kinds of relationships. And historically, the first field WordNet was created by my colleague in DLSU, Mr. Alan Bora, and his students back in 2010. But unfortunately, that hasn't been updated since. No? And then in 2019, a new project called FICOBU 2 was created by colleagues from Polytechnic University of the Philippines. But unfortunately, the actual resource of the WordNet was not shared, only the paper. So that really motivated us to work on this problem. Okay. So basically, we came up with a data collection processing pipeline so that we can build WordNet. So we started by collecting data from various sources, both offline and online. But the offline, if it's a book, we look for it in the Project Gutenberg, okay, or Google Books. Okay. So yun. So we just collected data from various sources and then we stored them in a corpus. So if you're doing NLP projects, you're very familiar with this kind of pipeline. So you start by building a corpus, and then at the top, there are two approaches, no? So at the top, this is using a network science approach. So we're creating a network out of the words. And then below, this is the NLP or the language modeling approach, the more popular one these days. Okay? Because in DLSU, we have a lot of language models. So if you've used Roberta or marami kami mga language models at DLSU because we have a lot of researchers working on natural language processing for Filipino. So we use some of that here. So we create embeddings here, we build a large network here, and then we combine everything into a field WordNet. Yeah. And then this project has three main products: the corpus, we field WordNet, and then the multi-layer network. So I won't go into all of the detail because of time constraint. But just to give you a context of how big our current corpus is, so we now have almost 1 million tokens, almost 1 billion tokens collected from various sources. So that includes news sites, Wikipedia, these books. We also collected from Wattpad because that's more contemporary, but we have copyright concerns for that. And then Twitter, of course, YouTube comments, Reddit, Pinoy Exchange during our time. No? Pero wala na to. And then Reddit, that's some more contemporary. And then we also tried to collect from other sources like lyrics, song lyrics. So any source where the language is being used. And it's not just Filipino, but also Philippine English. Because we have our own meanings for some English words as well. And we wanted to capture that. So this is for the corpus, and then this is the network science approach. So just very briefly, this is how we did it. If, for example, you have this sentence, no? Kumanta kami ng pambansang awit kanina. We remove some stop words. The nang is not included anymore. So if we want to build a network out of these words, we go from left to right, and then we set a window size. No? So from this word, what words are co-occurring with me with a window size of 3? So 1, 2, 3. So I just connect them all until I'm done going through all of the words. And then by the end of it, I have this network. And if I do that for all of the text that I have in the corpus, I would have a very large network. And then in the relationships, we also store some metadata when it was collected, so month, year, the source, and the type. And then we mentioned earlier that it's a multi-layer network. So each layer represents a source. So all social media files or text, no? So we created a network for each layer. Why do we do this? Because some meanings of words only exists in some media or domains. So for example, awit as expression of disappointment is usually seen in social media, online forums, but not in books. We don't use awit yet as a yung formal sense in books, right? So that's why we make a multi-layer network. Okay? And then this is just an example of what we discovered or what we were able to extract. So assuming that we have a snapshot of the network focusing on the word dilaw. So dilaw is a color, it's yellow. Okay? So we filtered the words around it, the strongest connections, and then we tried to detect communities of words. Okay, so we know that these words are more strongly connected with each other compared to these words, and it allowed us to see two different meanings of the word dilaw, the color and the one that means the Liberal Party, in the Philippines at least. So we were able to discover some of those senses, and that's the whole point of the project. Discover new meanings out of new words or of new words that are popping up. And then we just store every single sample sentence that contains that meaning of the word. And this is the NLP AI approach. So we use the language model. Okay. So we just retrain the language model so that it can produce the embeddings. Okay. We have a sentence embedding and then a sense embedding. Okay, so we used our version of BERT. No? Ayan. And then we store everything as senses. So these are just examples of senses that we were able to extract. And then we store everything in the PhilWordNet. So these are just examples of new meanings of words that we were able to detect. So awit, we were able to detect that. Malamig means cold, but it can also mean that something is weak or lumalamig ka na. It means parang ganun. Relationships, no? Toyo means crazy. Ghost is you're ghosting someone. And well, luckily, we are able to, because of the corpus that we have, we now have 2 open source Filipino language models that are available in Hugging Face. No? So we share that to everyone. And then, of course, the actual output of the whole project is also shared through, that's not the URL anymore, but we have a portal where you can just search a word and then it shows you all the possible senses of the word that we were able to detect. And of course, because we are CS people, we make APIs too, so that researchers can easily access the data that we have collected. So for the corpus, we have these endpoints. For the WordNet, we have those endpoints. So this is what the new portal looks like. So this is still ongoing, no? Because the project is already over. I mean, the funding is done. So we're now continuing the project here in the institute. Okay, and then these are just some of the information that we share, even the networks. And this one is showing you where a certain sense of a word is more dominating. So this sense is more dominating in news sites compared to books. And then this is just comparing the different senses of the word. So the red one is the more dominating sense. So in linguistics, a sense means a meaning of a word. And a word can have many different meanings. No? And yeah, since may embedding, meron ding embedding. So where can we use this? Of course, we can contribute, okay, to creating the first large Filipino word net. And then it can also be used for semantic analysis because different meanings of the word can mean different, kung positive or negative. Okay, so for example, awit, it can be positive, the original meaning, but the new meaning is more negative if it's on a scale. It can also be used. I mean, our partner for this project is Senti AI, so we're helping them build this resource so that they can use it. Okay. For translation, again, different words when they appear on certain platforms can mean different things. Now, if you use the word awit in Twitter, you would know that it means the expression. But if you see it in a book, you wouldn't think that it means expression of disappointment. So this is very helpful. Ayan. And yeah, and that's everyone in the team. So we're working with Doc Chari. We also work with Eunice and many undergraduate students. Okay, so to end my time, let me just share with you our program very quickly, just in case you don't know yet. So we now have the Master of Science in Data Science in De La Salle University. We're late in the game, I know, but administrative, bureaucratic stuff, no? Can't really help it. No? Some people just have advantages over others. Okay. So yeah, but given that we are a Lasallian institution, our goal is to make certain programs more accessible to people. No? So we still created a Master of Science in Data Science program even though we're late in the game. No? So just so you are aware, it's a 6-term research-oriented program, okay? Focusing on the ethical applications of data science, and it was benchmarked or designed based on the following curriculum guidelines from ACM, from AAP, and from APEC. Okay, so for a curriculum guideline outline, so for core courses, if you are interested, you will be learning the following things: principles of data science, data viz, machine learning, big data in scalable computing, data governance, ethics and privacy, and of course, research methods. So this is a thesis program. It's not a capstone program. Para lang clear sa lahat. A capstone is applied, a thesis is you're expected to innovate. No? And we need more people innovating in data science in the Philippines, not just people who apply. Because it's easy to apply. Okay? I mean, even most of you already apply some data science practices, right? And then, of course, if you don't have a CS or computing background, we still welcome you. We're a Lasallian institution, no? We don't discriminate, okay? So if you don't have a computing background, you're still welcome. We'll just recommend some remedial courses. For example, if you really have zero programming background, we offer some remedial courses on programming, as well as statistics and probability, no? Yun. And then some elective courses, because the LSU is a university, you have access to all of the departments in the university. So all of the courses that they offer, you can take weekend credit as an elective. So if you're leaning more towards finance, you can take finance courses if you want to apply data science and finance. Or if you want to go into bioinformatics, you can take biology courses. That's fine. But of course, we also offer our own electives. So based on our expertise, no? In LaSalle, as one of the top schools in computing in the country, we have a very diverse pool of experts. So we have experts from natural language processing to computer vision, machine vision, to human-computer interaction, data science, artificial intelligence. We've been in the game for many years, even before it became the thing today. No? And many of the people that you know in those fields are also in our departments. No? So you have access to these people. And we have access to people outside as well. So that's one of the things that we can assure you, no, if you join our program. And that's the benefit of being in a university. And then of course, as a major requirement, a comprehensive examination, a thesis, and because of CHED, you're supposed to publish your work. No, not because of us, because of CHED. Okay? So if you want to do this full-time, you have an estimated of 2 years. So you take 3 courses every term. So we're trimestral. So for those who are not familiar, we have 3 terms in a year. So first term, you take those 2 courses plus an elective. And so padami ng padami. Actually, your second term is the heaviest. No? 2 electives plus 2 core. And then your second year will really be just for your thesis. That's it. So first year, you take all the courses. Second year, you just work on your thesis. If you are doing this part-time, that's also possible. You have at least 3 years to complete. So the first year, just focus on the core courses. There's 6 core courses, and then 4 electives on your second year. Take a compre, and then do your thesis on your third year. Okay? You can do this faster. It really depends on you. Okay? But this is part-time if you're working. No? What's nice about the program is it's also the first, no, not the first, but it's one of the MS data science programs that are already accredited by the UST for their ERDT scholarship. No? So if you already have a very strong computing background and you want to take that scholarship and finish this as a full-time student, then you can apply for the ERDT scholarship. The ERDT scholarship has monthly allowance. It also has funding for your research. Pwede kang bumili ng equipment. Some of the machines that are here are also coming from our ERDT scholars. And then you also get funding to present elsewhere. So those are the benefits. And we're one of the few schools that has MSDS accredited for the scholarship. And yeah, basically, I guess that's it. No, I will end here because these are just descriptions of our courses. Ayan, these are just some of the faculty members. So, yeah, people usually highlight how many PhDs. So, of course, we have PhD holders. And these are just some of the people who will guide you along the way. Jude is here, Jude Teves, I'm also here. We are a very diverse pool. So we have Rene from physics, no? And we also have someone from business. So we try as much as possible to get people from different backgrounds to actually teach our courses. And then these are just some of the research that we're trying to do. So if you're interested in any of these projects or any of these topics, feel free to reach out to us, and then maybe you can find your place here. in DLSU at the Data Science Institute. And yeah, and I guess I will end here. Yeah, thank you. Hello?
Pero kayong any questions from the crowd? I think hindi yata nakapag-ask ng question. Particularly dun sa program?
Yeah, one. Schedule. Schedule na ulit. Classes.
Grad school classes are in the evenings, 6 to 9 p.m.
Both for part-time tsaka
Yes, both for part-time and full-time. Always in the evening. If you're full-time, you still take it in the evening. That will give you time in the morning to study more. Yeah, or prepare yourself for the evening class. Yes.
Question po, yung PhilWorldNet po, di ba po, does it provide po kumbaga work embeddings na po?
Yes, we will also provide
Is it
that.
available for public use?
Yes. Once it's available, we'll share it to everyone.
What kind of words yung available sa PhilNet?
PhilWorldNet? What kind of words?
Like ba, may certain criteria ba? Like bawal ba yung mga bad words or ano?
The bad words are also part of our language, the profane ones, but I mean, it's gonna be there. It's gonna be there. But in the example sentences, we try to filter the profane sentences. Yes.
The program po, is it blended or brick and mortar?
So right now the classes are online, but sometimes some faculty members ask students to come in person for presentations, etc., but mostly online. So that's why we have students also from other parts of the country right now.
In-anticipate niyo na po ba na yung PhilWorldNet magagamit siya sa public discourse analysis and for like analyzing the spread of information and disinformation?
Yes, we already talked with Commission sa Wikang Filipino, so we will be working with them on this project. On the spread of misinformation, yes, because that's also one of the things that we are working on as a project. So that's why we have a data center there, and there's a control center with many monitors. So the goal is really to monitor what's happening online there, next door.
Pwede tingnan.
Collaboration?
Not yet. Huh?
May mga collaboration po ba kayo with platforms like Twitter or...
No, not yet. We stopped collecting because they don't allow academic researchers yet. But Reddit is coming up with some changes to their access. But Twitter, not. Yes, very important question. Tuition fee. Actually in LaSalle, the website, you can just search DLSU tuition fee calculator. You'll find the calculator. If you're a part-time, 2 courses, that's around for first enrollment, around 36K. 36K, 2 courses. But that includes a lot of first-time fees. So if you're an old student already, that will be lower. That's for part-time. So 2 courses lang yan. Yes.
I have to say na hindi siya nagkakalayo sa UP. Last 2 questions. Yeah.
Siya, then yun.
Sorry, I don't know if I missed it, but does the PhilWorldNet includes other dialects?
Not yet. It only includes Filipino now, but we are working with the Commission sa Wikang Filipino, or KWF, to include or to set up a donation portal. So if you have documents or text in different Philippine languages, you can donate there and then we'll process it using our own pipeline. Yes.
I see meron ng portal for PhilWorld, but is there an available API?
Yes, there will be an API and then there will be available endpoints for researchers and devs. Yes, that's the whole plan.
Okay.
Sound like, a lot lot less smarter. So it was a really good talk in terms of trying to adapt WordNet to the Filipino language, the Tagalog. So I think what I'm going to focus on today is going to be a mix of what the initial speakers started off with, like so data engineering, batch processing. You saw a bit of Spring batch processing later on. I'll focus on distributed systems and real-time data processing. We'll probably look at some of the examples where it can be used together with NLP as well. So I'll kind of close it off with how you can bring in all these various different processing technologies as a way to ensure that you can have real-time applications being built. So, like I said, I'm a solutions engineer with Confluent. So what do we do as a solutions engineer? Before that, I'm not new to Philippines. I've been here before, like many of times. Mostly, oops. Yeah, so I've been here like plenty of times before. So I've been mostly in Manila, Makati, the BGC area. We have a lot of customers that we work with. So probably that's something of interest to some of you because they do work with Kafka and Confluent, yeah, which is something you'd be interested to find out what are the local companies working on technologies such as real-time data processing. Right? I've been to a little bit out of the city as well, to Los Baños. That was an interesting trip outside of the city, and it was nice to see the people that have spent some time there looking at all of it. Right, so as a solutions engineer at Confluent, what we do is spend time on various different technologies. So we don't necessarily work on a single technology every day. So we do have a core product that we work on, but it's primarily looking at integrating these different data sources into a real-time data processing technology, and it actually processes data on the fly, and eventually we get the data across into target systems. So today I'll be focusing on a specific pipeline as to how customers transfer really large data volumes into Kafka, and from there how do they sync it to systems like data warehouses where they be able to query it in real time. Right, so for those of you who are not familiar with Kafka, we can probably get started with just the basics of what Kafka is. So Kafka was born as a project, as an open source project within LinkedIn, where 3 engineers were trying to solve the problem of moving large volumes of data in real time. So here primarily what we were looking at is to solve the problem of real-time data delivery, processing the data in real time as it flows through the system, and being able to process large volumes of data. So this was the problem that they were trying to solve, and they came up with this system that they built, which was distributed in nature, which means you have, machines, multiple different machines, across where you actually, spin out and install this system, and it actually processes data not on a single machine, but multiple different, machines in one go. So Kafka is, that system that got brought out of LinkedIn. So primarily it was a messaging system where you have writers, you have data being published into like messaging queues, and eventually you have readers which consume the data from this particular system. So when things got serious, they stepped out and formed their own company, which is called as Confluent, and that's where we work for. And Confluent started off as again an enterprise software company where they were focusing on getting all of these features rolled out to enterprise customers. So things customers like banks, FSI companies like insurance, telco companies, plenty of them started using Confluent, and they started building real-time data pipelines around over here. Right. So today I'll just focus on this particular topic where we're looking at large volume ingests to warehouses. So here warehouses would typically mean data warehouses, and we're looking at specific things called as change data capture pipeline. So if you're familiar with databases, like transactional databases, in data engineering, you would typically have this process of extracting data out of a source system. You would load that into like a ETL software, and then eventually you process it and load that into a data warehouse, right? So in here, we'll speak specifically about how you can extract data from databases in real time and see how that. All right, so what are the different ways that we can actually extract data from databases? The good old way would be to just connect to these system which is using a native protocol like JDBC or ODBC, pulling the data out and then eventually getting it down to a system that can process it. So here we're going to look at how we do things differently with Kafka. So here we make use of Kafka Connect. So Kafka Connect allows you to deploy what we call as connectors. So we do have something called as JDBC connectors, which can actually connect to your source database as long as you have a JDBC driver that is compliant with your database, extract the data out of the tables that you want to get data out of, and eventually get the data across into the Kafka topics. So once the data is in Kafka topics, you can basically apply real-time processing logic on it as the data flows through the system, and eventually you can get it down into data warehouses. Right, so using this JDBC way of getting data out of systems and loading it into Kafka, there are different modes in which you can do this. You have the bulk mode where you would want all the data existing in a particular table or a schema to be ingested into Kafka. So that's something which the JDBC Sync Connector supports. Additionally, you might want only the changes, which is any insert, update, or delete, which happens on the database, to be ingested into Kafka as a real-time event. So in that case, we do support like what we call as incremental, uploads as well. And then finally, you can also have custom queries. So you can actually write like a select statement or call out a procedure which can actually extract the result set that can feed the data into the Kafka topics accordingly. So how a connector looks like is pretty much a bunch of configuration that you submit as a JSON payload into what we call as the Kafka Connect framework. And it basically deploys this task which can actually extract the data from the databases, and it would load the data into Kafka topics. So once the data is in Kafka, you can think of it like similar to database has tables, we have topics in Kafka, and the topics is something which you process continuously, right? So as the data flows through these topics, you can have stream processing logic that can actually, process the data on the fly. Right, so just looking at one of the examples as to how our customers use the JDBC source connector. So typically you might have a table that has like several million rows, and if you want to actually extract data out of it, you can deploy the JDBC source connector. Probably if you set the mode as timestamp, it would just get all the new data which is being inserted into the tables as such, right? So in this case, you can just keep polling the database, look at every time there's a new record that is ingested into your source table. Based on the timestamp, you know that it's a new record, so it will get ingested as an event into the database, right? So that's how you have the JDBC source connector working on really large data volumes. Now the problem with JDBC source connectors is that it's very select oriented, right? So it's running a select query on the database, which means it locks the table, and you don't have other applications which would have access to that table in the meantime. So naturally there was a difficulty in using JDBC as a way to extract large volumes of data, because if you think of it, if you have a million rows of data within a table and you run a select query on it, it will just take forever, right? And in the meantime, no other application would be actually able to use the source tables. So for that, this mechanism called as change data capture was built. If those of you are familiar with it, just bear with me. But change data capture is a technology that uses the underlying database logs as a way to extract those events. So any DML event that happens on the database, an insert, update, or delete, is something that is captured in the database transaction logs, and you can actually cascade that into the Kafka topics instead. So instead of doing a select query on the table directly, what you're doing is going down to the database log level, which is a file system, and you extract the data which is being written into these database transaction logs. So how that works in the Kafka context is pretty much another connector that you deploy. So similar to the database connector, you have a CDC source connector that can connect to the database transaction logs, and it would extract the data and feed that as an event is every time recorded into this transaction log. So it's really useful for real-time updates from databases without actually having to lock the tables or the database schemas underneath. Right, so just looking at how CDC works across multiple different databases, right? So I think folks have spoken about Oracle systems, you've looked at other transactional databases. So in Oracle, there's this concept called as redo logs, and you have archive logs. So CDC connectors typically don't look at the Oracle tables itself. It rather goes into the redo log level, extracts the data from there event by event, ingests that into a Kafka topic. In the MySQL or Postgres world, you have the concept of bin logs, which are similar to the redo logs in Oracle, except that they don't have detailed like SEN and so on in Oracle. They would rather have just the events which are being recorded in the bin log, which gets cascaded onto the Kafka topic. So if I do, as an application, insert, update or delete a particular row of a table in my MySQL database, it gets recorded as a bin log event. The connector would just pick that up and cascade it over. The third would be in terms of SQL Server. So in SQL Server world, they have something called as a transaction log. So it's similar again to the redo logs or the bin log, but it would just use, again, a connector that reads from the offline logs that are available rather than directly querying the databases. All right, so just going through a few customer use cases where our customers are actually using some of these connectors, because I thought that'll be useful to understand how things are being put into practice as well. So there was a telco customer who was looking at Oracle databases. They wanted to get data from multiple different tables which had really large volumes of data. This is looking at GBs and TBs of data. And what they made use of is the Oracle CDC connector in order to just capture the incremental changes. So any new transaction that was being recorded on the database basically gets cascaded as a new event into the Kafka. So here, what they were looking at is what's the best way to parallelize this whole thing. So Kafka, like I mentioned before, is a distributed system, which means that every time I hit an issue of scalability, right? So if I have too many rows that are being captured at the same time. So if I have concurrent transactions on the database, which is happening, at the rate of like say a few, 1,000 rows per second, essentially I would want to scale the system. So in this case, if I want to scale the system, I would basically just add another connector task, or I call it as a connect worker, which allows me to capture larger volumes of data. So, skipping through this, eventually what do customers actually do with all this data that they capture from databases, right? So, traditionally what people were doing with data engineering steps is that they would extract data, load it into a data warehouse or a data lake, and then figure out later, what do they actually want to do with it, right? So raw data is being captured and kind of stored in some place, but they don't exactly know what they want to do with it. Probably they use it for some reporting, building some dashboards, but what Kafka and the event-driven architecture, helps with is to kind of flip the model where you try to understand what is the business process that you're trying to solve first, push that down to the stream processing logic, and then you start ingesting these data sources. So here, for example, is a pipeline where you have data being captured using these CDC connectors. So every time a transaction occurs on the transaction database, you're capturing that. So if it's a payments transaction, you can actually feed that into a model that can infer fraud, right? So you could have a pre-built model which says that, okay, based on certain variables, I can detect whether a transaction is a fraud or an actual transaction that can go through, and you can actually feed that into a model which can infer these in real time. So the CDC connector really helps you with identifying these real-time changes and cascade that into the Kafka topics, and from there you can feed the inference models eventually. Right. So a very common CDC pipeline is to eventually ingest data into data warehouses. And that's where things get a little complicated in terms of how quickly can you make data available for the users. I think Mike earlier mentioned that typically in a data engineering pipeline, eventually you want to make available the data to the users pretty much in real time, right? So in that case, what you need to do is ensure that the data is being processed quickly on the fly and eventually make it available to the end user. So one of the ways is again using a generic JDBC sync connector. So which means that you run a connector, use the JDBC driver for that target database or a data warehouse, and then eventually sync the data using this JDBC sync connector. A typical pipeline which one of our customers looked at is to load it into like a data warehouse which is single store. Single store is like a columnar database which is really good for rollup. And what they did was to make use of this JDBC sync connector with a single store JDBC driver, eventually get the data across into single store. Now, some of the challenges that they had in this whole process is that they had really large volumes of data. So the initial snapshot of data that was being captured from the source databases was something that they couldn't process pretty much in real time, right? So they had to parallelize this whole thing. So in Kafka, again, you have this concept of topics, and you have topics which can be split into partitions across multiple machines. So you can actually leverage on parallelism, which can read from all these partitions in parallel and ingest into the data warehouse. So if you think of a topic with 10 partitions, it means that every time a transaction that happens on the database, it doesn't necessarily need to go to one machine. It can go to multiple different machines. And if it goes to multiple different machines, it means that I can read from each of these machines in parallel, and I can ingest into my target system. So if I read 10, if there are 10 readers or 10 threads which are reading this, different partitions in parallel, it would just ingest that accordingly into the, a target database much faster. Right, so that's exactly what this slide covers, where you're looking at partition 0, 1, and n number of partitions on a topic. You would have a Kafka Connect worker which allows you to read these multiple partitions in one go. So in parallel, you would just have one single connect task which is being running, and the writes happen to the data warehouse pretty fast as well. The second method is using like specific data warehouse sync connectors. So you can, depending on the data warehouse, you can identify a connector which we provide, either be it a Redshift, be it OLAP system like HANA or anything. You have connectors which are available. And what happens with typical data warehouses is that you can do a batch ingest into these data warehouses, and you can also do incremental ingest. So one of the customers again tried like using native data warehouse connectors, where they had the challenge of getting bulk of the data ingested into like a Redshift database pretty fast, and they had to look for alternate strategies, right? One of the main reasons why they had this challenge was because Redshift as OLAP database has this limitation of APIs which it cannot ingest multiple rows in one go, right? So the batch insert is not something which it was built for. So you had to find other ways through which you could ingest data into Redshift much faster. So just being conscious of time, I'll just quickly go through this, where what we were looking at in terms of solving this problem for this customer was looking at what are the ways to increase that speed of ingest. So have multiple tasks, do things in parallel, kind of tune the connectors for things like how frequently it polls and so on. Those things didn't actually work out. So eventually, we're looking at messages at like about 8 to 10 million which are being ingested per second into the source databases, right? So you can just imagine the real-time data volume of ingest as such. So eventually what we did was like the best way to get data into any AWS system, just learning from here, was that get it into S3. So as long as you can get the data into S3 written fast enough, you can just make use of the S3 copy command to load that into Redshift, right? So this was one of the ways that we got around with this problem, where this customer had like millions of records being written in the initial snapshot, which couldn't be ingested fast enough into the data warehouse. So what we did, rather than ingesting it directly into the data warehouse, created like a staging layer in S3. Things can be written fast into a file system or an object storage like S3, and then from there you could just load that into Redshift pretty fast as well. Right, so in terms of how you can load that into Redshift, I think it's pretty straightforward in terms of what tooling is available on the AWS Redshift Workbench. You have like a copy command which can do an S3 copy from the S3 bucket into the Redshift table that you want to actually copy to. So as long as Kafka Connect could make the data available in real time in S3, so as long as it could sync the data into S3 fast enough, it could just basically pick it up from there and just copy it over to the target tables. So here, just some statistics again in terms of how quickly it improved the whole pipeline efficiency. It started ingesting things at 7.6 million rows per second, as compared to when it was earlier using the Redshift connector directly, where it was just ingesting few 10,000 records per second. Right? So that's the performance gain that we got. Right, so I'll just quickly skip through this, pretty much coming to the close of where we're going with this. I think, based on the previous speakers, this is a data engineering meetup. So primarily what we want to touch upon is that data engineering is a process, oriented job where you do like multiple different things, right? So you look at different data sources, you look at different methods in which you can extract data out of these databases or different data sources, and then you process them in different ways, and eventually you want to make that available to the end users. And in today's world, in the business context, the more real time that you can make data available to the end users, the better it is, right? So we kind of look at data engineering as like what Mike spoke about equals, what Tristan spoke about, what Prof spoke about, and then what I spoke about. So you have various different aspects which comes together in order to get data processed in real time and delivered to the end users. So this is one example which one of our colleagues built, looking at real-time data feeds from RSS and news and so on, which is being ingested into Kafka topics. And in parallel, it is also updating, an LLM or a RAG model, which is actually doing things like understanding sentiment of that particular, article and suggesting articles which are similar to, what you're reading currently, right? So that's something which is available on GitHub. You could just, search for Confluent GitHub for this particular, pipeline. And if you're interested in how data can be ingested into Kafka, update machine learning models in real time, we also have several tutorials which are available for that. And if that's of interest to you and get to know more about Kafka and Confluent, we have this developer.confluent.io. I know it's quite contradictory in terms of, when you come into a university and say that, okay, industry provides you all the courses that you want to learn, but I think it's all goes hand in hand, right? So we learn from academicians, we implement that in industry, at the same time we kind of take things that we learn from the industry, go back to the academics, and the academics try to innovate on the challenges that we have within the industry as well, right? So that's exactly what we're doing with multiple different customers that we work with, and also go back to like the world of research. So aside from that, if you're interested in trying out Confluent, we have various ways that you can run. So you can run it on your laptop locally using Docker images. You can use our fully managed service on the cloud, depending on the cloud provider of choice, and you would be able to get started with this pretty much as quick as you can have it. Or if you want to learn more about this stuff, hands-on, try out using various different examples that our teams are building. There would be event-driven workshop series which is available for you in the next month, and there's a series of workshops which are useful for you to get hands-on with Confluent, understand how you build these pipelines, how you use stream processing, and how you go about with understanding how event-driven architectures are built as compared to monolithic legacy architectures, right? So that's something which we'll have up and coming. So if you're interested, just go onto this link, register yourselves, and we'll have our team reach out to you, with more details. All right, so that's my time, and good to be back in the Philippines. And yeah, thanks for all of you to make it this evening and spend time with us. So appreciate it, and thank you.
Let's have some time for questions. Do you have any Kafka questions? Yes, go.
Right. So thank you very much for that presentation. My question is that from the different technologies, like for example, Snowflake, Microsoft Fabric, and then we have Kafka. So how does Kafka basically connect to the whole ecosystem of the data engineering? Is it more just an adapter for ingesting, or it's also just being used also by Snowflake region? Maybe you could enlighten us.
Right. So I think what the fundamental difference between like how data engineering was done before, like Kafka existed, was that you had like data source systems which you extract data out of, put it into a staging layer, then you'll have ETL tools which pick it up, process it, and then eventually you write it into like a system like Snowflake. So what Kafka does is pretty much look at that integration in real time as well, which means your source system gets connected, which is a transactional database or any other NoSQL system or a messaging system gets connected through connectors. And as and when a change or an event occurs in these source systems, it gets available within the Kafka topic. So once it's available in the Kafka topic, it's up to you whether you want to immediately make it available into a system like Snowflake. For that, you can use a sync connector and just push it across. Otherwise, the data is actually persisted within Kafka, which means you can process it at any given point in time. If you want to do things like pattern analysis, where you want to replay the data and understand how it's changed over a period of time. That's something which you'll be able to do as well, right? So you can think of Kafka as like a distributed database in some nature, but at the same time, it's also a messaging system which can deliver data immediately if that's what you want to do as well.
So it's also a messaging system?
Yeah, it's a messaging system primarily, but it's a messaging system with persistence, which means that I have data being stored within Kafka. It's not just that it gets pulled out of Kafka as soon as it is processed. Yeah, it can rewind and replay.
Other questions? Okay.
Oh.
Round of applause.
Just like to add, Kafka is, well, in my own personal definition, Kafka is a message broker. That's correct, right? Yeah. So I think one thing to call out is that once you, I mean, it's really great that we were able to get speakers for both batch and streaming, because normally batch is like, anywhere that you go, batch is like the default. But once you've experienced streaming, it's really different. It's really different. It's like a different animal. So if you're going to work with that kind of data, it's really rich. But you will need a different set of tools, and Kafka is one of those. So it's good for you guys to learn different tools, so you don't have like just one Swiss Army knife. You need to learn how to use the appropriate tool for the appropriate problem. That's the hallmark of an engineer. Okay. I think we're at the latter part now of the program. I think what I would like to start first with is okay. No, let's just have a quick review about our sponsors. Thank you to Confluent, thank you to LaSalle, and thank you to Azul Systems. As well as to our organizers, thank you to Tristan and Gladwin and to Jansen and the data engineering team, Pilipinas team, and then also to Manila Kafka and wherever you are. Let's have a quick feedback. So feedback is a gift. Please scan it, guys. We'll use this as our attendance. If you recall, also we have some things to raffle. So we'll use this moment to get some. Tama. Yeah, ito na yung mechanics natin for the raffle. So please take time to answer the feedback. So what did you guys learn today? You learned what is data engineering. You learned that you can actually use a number of languages. No? So at the start we use Python, and then after that we have Java, and then you have the two types of movement of data. Which is batch, and then we have streaming. The different applications that you can do once you have a good pipeline in place. So an example was NLP, and then the project, the Fieldword Net. And to think, guys, we're only at the beginning. We're only looking at text. We're only looking at transaction, but there is video, there is audio, there is transaction data, there is business data, there is social media. There are so many things, and to be able to create proper architecture and to move data such that the analyst and data scientists and whoever will want to explore the data that you create, to create that right platform. So that's really the challenge for data engineers. Okay, so everyone, so what we can do is we can maybe have a 5-minute break. para we can work on the the raffle. We still have a lot of food at the back, so if you're still hungry, drinks, the washroom is at the door, near the door outside.